Lara became the director of Parks and Rec in January of 2021, so very recently. She had 16 years of experience working in Parks and Rec. In Florida, she introduced a needs assessment heat map that showed all the repair, replacement, and renovation needs, and they were sorted by district and funding and eligibility and benefits to the community. In other words, she's good at system planning. She got to work with system organization. Our city manager, Michael Ortega, commented on her hiring that she shows a blend of technical and interpersonal skills necessary to ensure optimal customer experiences, sound management of human resources, and excellent stewardship of our beloved parks and recreation resources. So that's a recommendation for Lara. What we're going to do today is have a listen and then a conversation with Fatima, Natalie, and Lara. When I was in Marin County this summer visiting old friends and family members, Kevin had asked me if I would just ask a few of my former associates in the zero waste advocacy we did there. So how'd you do it there? You know, what worked for getting zero waste so forward on the agenda in Marin County? So I talked to County Supervisor's aide, who'd been about 26 years in that position. And she said, well, the first thing is we had a true leader in the County Supervisor's Board. He was himself a zero waste visionary. And so that was a very big difference. We just had a running start with Charles McGlashan there. But then she commented about the building of relationships, which he was very good at and which we all learned to do. She said, don't put administrators on the hot seat. You know, they've got so much pressure. They may not have enough staffing. They may have multiple, sometimes competing priorities. So give them a break. Essentially what was she saying, while you stay present and communicate with them as much as you can. Let them be seen for what they're trying to do and then help them get to something even better. That was her message in brief. We will not put our three civic friends on the hot seat today, but we will put them on the love seat. We're going to ask questions, you get to answer, and you get to ask questions of each other as well. So the first question, each of you will answer. I'm going to use my timer because otherwise we just won't have time. And so we're going to figure 3 minutes to answer each question. And then the next person gets to answer the next person, and then we'll do the next question. At the end of all that, Fatima, Natalie, Lara, you may ask each other questions if you like. We will break at 10:55, 5 minutes. We'll come back for some more Q&A with just everybody. And by 11:30, we'll have, you'll be free to go, but you're welcome to stay. Our three ambassadors will be doing a presentation to us as a skills practice. Okay. So question 1. What is your department's mission relative to sustainability? And what is your role in that regard? Fatima, would you like to start?
All right. So it's not that I'm within a specific department per se. And before I begin, I do want to say that I have my 3 babies here. So if you hear some noise in the background, it's them. So thanks in advance for your patience. Yeah, so going back to the question. You know, the city of Tucson has a climate mayor, and Mayor Romero ran on a working families platform or agenda. And that essentially for office, it became our guiding star for policymaking. And on one of the areas of the working families agenda is climate action and sustainability. And that included specific goals, including like planting 1 million trees, which is now 2 million trees, developing a robust and equitable green infrastructure program, which is now Storm to Shade, transitioning the city's fleet to electric, and we have made great progress on that, expanding the recharge programs, and and all of that really embedding equity and people-centered approaches to all we do. And so as her climate and sustainability advisor, I was tasked with advancing that vision for a climate and environmental justice city. And so in my role, so I do that precisely, advance policies and programs that would help the city become a more climate resilient and sustainable city with a strong focus on people-centered policies, equity-centered initiatives, because if you help those at the front lines, you essentially help everybody else. So yeah, so that's basically what I do in my role in sustainability.
Thank you, Fatima, and done in about 1.5 minutes. There's lots of time for continuing the conversation. How about Natalie? What is your department's mission relative to sustainability, and what is your role?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you the exact mission. I wanted to get it right, is to preserve and protect the environment of Pima County for the long-term benefit of residents' health, welfare, safety, and quality of life, and to identify and respond to environmental issues by providing public services, including monitoring, enforcement, information, education, and solid waste management. So that is our actual proper mission statement. And I am the Outreach and Education Program Manager for the department. It is a wide variety of things that I do, including I issue high pollution advisories, which we've been having to issue more often than I would like this summer for ozone, and for we did have a dust issue this week as well. I respond to the public and the media, and I administer the Clean Air Program. And so we get grant funding from the State Department of Environmental Quality to actually administer 2 different grants. One is for the Clean Air Program, which started about 30 years ago. We had different air pollution problems back then. It was actually initiated because of carbon monoxide was an issue back then. Fortunately, based on new technologies in motor vehicles, namely catalytic converters, that is no longer an issue. But we do still have air pollution issues in Pima County. And so the goal of our program is to educate people about those issues, make sure that they can access real-time air quality data, that they are aware of air pollution issues when they happen, and then namely really to try to inform and encourage people to drive less. So ultimately, we're trying to encourage people at least 1 day a week on their regular commutes to try to drive less. We do that in a variety of ways. We do presentations, we work in schools, and we do events, and we do social media. So there's a broad range of things that we do to inform and encourage the public. We also have another grant that we administer that you may have heard about. We did an advertising campaign for it over the springtime, and it's the Lawn and Garden Voucher Program. And so one of the things that actually seems like it might be small in the grand scheme of things, but lawn and garden equipment pollutes quite a bit per unit. There's no air pollution control devices on those. So if you ever used a lawnmower, you can smell that fuel really well. It's actually very similar to an old like Volkswagen Beetle, what's coming out of those. And so each one that we can get off the streets and replace with an electric version of that is a step in the right direction. So the state does give us grant funds for that particular program, and we're allowed to issue vouchers at Home Depot for lawn and garden equipment for it to be replaced with an electric version, so people don't have to pay the full cost of that. The other role that I have is I'm the environmental justice manager for the county, and that I'm trying to kind of redefine, I guess, that role. There is a very specific role that I do have to play with that, involving namely certain contentious air pollution permits. We did have one recently, if you read in the paper several times, about Becton Dickinson. It's a medical sterilization facility. And so, facilities that emit air pollutants do have to get permits from us depending on how much they pollute. And there are certain types of facilities that we want to do extra outreach for. We want to make sure that that communities are aware if these types of facilities are going into those communities, and that we're doing the appropriate amount of outreach to the people so that they can provide feedback and public comment and make sure that they are aware and they can be a part of that process. Unfortunately, oftentimes, we're constrained by the rules that are in place. So we can't not issue air quality permits. We have to issue them based on the rules. And so if the facilities do comply, ultimately, we can be as stringent as we can with what we're hiring. But we can't not issue a permit just because we don't want facilities to be there. So the environmental justice piece of that is really involving the community, making sure they're aware. And then during the public comment period, we have those public meetings and we involve the community. I would like to expand on that role with other jurisdictions because a lot of times those rules really are very aligned with zoning requirements. And so that would be a topic I think that Fatima and I could probably work on at the city county level to see how we can really be a little bit more mindful about where and how we place or what we allow certain facilities to do in certain areas, because I do believe that Tucson is kind of a poster child for environmental injustices over the last 30 years. I think if you've lived here long enough, you know what those are. And so I think we have a lot of room to grow on that particular topic.
Thank you, Natalie. That's a lot. And I was watching Fatima respond, so it sounds like you've got a conversation coming up. Let's move to Lara, who tried, unfortunately, wait, you're trying the camera, maybe it'll work. And Lara, just to know that I introduced you before you showed up on the screen. So in short, you come well recommended.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm still trying to figure out how to fix whatever's going on with my camera, and I don't want to delay the process. So I'm with the Parks and Recreation Department of the director, and I've been there about 20 months now. And in case folks are not familiar, so our mission statement is to enrich our community through inclusive, innovative, fun programs and safe, beautiful, sustainable places. And so I think that's quite interesting that sustainable actually is in our mission statement, and that's what we're talking about today. From a sustainable aspect, for me, that word means two things. How can we be environmentally friendly? How can we be climate action responding, heat island effect, of course, with trees, water, better focused on water conservation or better practices where we don't have to be so water reliant on potable water. So you will find that within many of our parks, we do have reclaimed systems. Just this past week, we had a conversation about trying to look at one of our rec centers to do AC condensation capturing and seeing what kind of water would we get from there to recycle back into parks. But it's also about, we're currently focused on turf reduction. How can we soften the edges of parks, bring in GSI solutions? We are very mindful that there are many folks that don't have a green, grassy backyard and do come to a park for that experience. But how do we do that thoughtfully and mindfully, that we're not perhaps over turfing or have too much turf, if that's actually a term. And what are our management practices? The city does have or did have a resolution to try and embrace more of an organic first thinking, but it has taken time to figure out what are sustainable practices that we can actually apply under an organic first approach. For example, Sentinel peat, buffalo grass, the only thing that will work currently. We are actually looking at some testing of other things, but the glyphosate, I always say that wrong, but sorry, but it seems to be the only thing that's effective with the buffalo grass. But I'm actually in conversations with the Desert Museum right now on maybe agricultural abatement, so goats or sheep on the rocky terrains, eating the buffalo grass and then coming in with a spray. So then we're having to use less of the actual spray product for management practices. And then how can we also look at soil health to help with weed abatement? But those are early days for us. And so the second half of the word sustainable for me is what are practices that once we embrace and implement can actually sustain. Because that's the biggest challenge I would say you find within a park system like ours, 3,300 acres, 130 actual locations, and not enough staff to do it all. We don't just manage trees and grass, but we also clean restrooms and empty trash cans and keep pools open. So there's a lot of different features and factors that go into how we manage. But I do feel that our department's philosophy is we are trying to embrace more and more opportunities that allow us to test out different solutions and see what's actually sustainable. We have a very good relationship with Blue's team from the GSI group, as well as Tucson Clean and Beautiful. We look at also where do we have the opportunity to plant more trees, but then how do we ensure those trees are going to survive? It all fits beautifully within the Million Trees program. But what we've learned, courtesy of having an urban forester on staff now within the city, is we need that first 3 years of water supply for those trees to really establish and be strong, and then plan to then pull away from the reliance on an irrigation system. So recently we got some American Rescue Plan dollars, and we've allocated $1.2 million over the next 4 years to that effort, so that Nicole, when she has folks that want to put more trees in parks, we can match with the irrigation that's needed to sustain them. So Stuart, I hope that gives a good overview of the department so far.
That's great. Thank you, Lara. There's always more to say. I really appreciate all of that, all three of you. We're going to go to the second question, which is, what is a memorable moment that led you to environmental, sustainability, social awareness? Take any one of those three. What's a memorable moment that led you to the kind of awareness that's driving you now? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep the time rolling because I forgot to use it a couple of times. And only just because we've got till, let's see, I think it's 10:55 for a break. So I want to be sure we get at least those questions in before we break. Okay, so back to Fatima.
Yes, I would say, and maybe oversimplifying it in one moment, but really it was my upbringing. So I was born and raised in a tiny town, 2,500 people, that to this day, it doesn't have a gas station or a bank. So my backyard was the local river that crossed the town. There is no irrigated agriculture. So the corn and beans and the maguey that people grow is based on, the raining season. And so people in my town are very in tune with nature and weather patterns. And so if there's changes in weather, like that has a huge ripple effect. And so I grew up eating whatever was in season and, whatever nature had to provide. So a lot of the things that naturally grow in the mountains. And, it sounds silly, but I grew up using renewable energy, like to dry our clothes, the sun, like the most simple way of, using the energy. So a very simple life. And then making basins for trees is like a common practice. Reusing and upcycling containers, clothes, furniture, that was part of the norm. And so, growing up with the mentality of like taking only what you need was like the norm for everyone. So like from nature and from, your surroundings. And so when I came to the US, I was 15 years old, and I was really surprised to see like the excess of things and how disposable things are, including clothes. Like, I, in my family, we have these giving circle where we have different, the clothes on my niece, who is now 20, are clothes that my daughter is wearing, and clothes that go through like 6 kids in our family. And, you know, that's normal, and that's something good. And not just for the environment, like, but it makes you feel good, right? That like he has a long life. Of course, in that cycle, there's things that are really old, so you do have to discard of them. But there's things that, you know, just you can use them for a long time. And so I grew up with that as the norm, and coming to the US and just, you know, seeing how things are like one-time use, or there's an excess of things, was you know, surprising for me at the beginning. And so so for me, what really shaped who I am and how I see things in life was my you know, how I grew up in a very basic life. And in many ways, I miss that so much. I think we sometimes overcomplicate things. But yeah, like, you know, just being in tune with your surroundings and taking what you need kind of mentality is, you know, what grounds me. And that has shaped the way I think now. Of course, my educational experience as well. So my undergraduate at Berkeley, I took a lot of classes on just like development economics, like history, and like I learned a lot about the, you know, social inequities, institutional inequities. And so I think it was a combination of my lived experiences and my academic background that shaped the way I think right now. And I cannot point to one thing, but I would say, like, if I combine all of that, yeah, that's what made me today. So I'm sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but
just
yeah.
a little over 3 minutes, but we loved every word, Fatima, and not one experience, but rather a whole cascade of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. How about Natalie?
I also don't have one particular experience, but I will, and I apologize. I think I may have told this story the last, I was on this panel about a year ago,
Yes.
but this really is kind of the pivotal memory that I have of, I guess, becoming an environmentalist. I really don't remember a time when I didn't have environmental tendencies. I think it started when I was a freshman in high school, when I kind of got to the point where I was getting old enough to think beyond just myself. And so when I started high school, I joined a club that has, I still think to this day, one of the best acronyms I've ever heard, which was SHADOW. There was the Shadow Club, which stands for Students Helping Against the Destruction of Our World. I think it's an amazing acronym. And I think it's just kind of instilled in my personality that is who I am. And so when I heard about that there was a club focused on environmental topics, I just was drawn to it, and I wanted to learn more. So that is my first memory of being interested in environmental topics. And it really never went away. I mean, there was a wide variety of things I learned in that club. I remember my Spanish teacher was the leader of the club. And then, you know, after learning just kind of hitting on a number of different environmental topics, I did decide that I wanted to study it in college. And at the time, it was in the early 90s that I was in high school. There wasn't nearly as many opportunities to study environmental science as there is now. And so the University of Arizona was actually at that time the only place that had an environmental science program. And so that I never have any memory of thinking about any other thing that I wanted to study but environmental science. And so that's what brought me to Tucson. I was living up in Phoenix, and I'm happy that it did, because I love living here and I love Tucson. And so I did study environmental science, and then obviously learned a much deeper level about these issues. And ultimately I did make it to PDEQ for the first time as a college intern. And I ended up meeting my husband there, and back there again. It feels like a place where I should be. And so, yeah, I think that's basically kind of a summary of answering that question, but it's not one particular moment. I really just don't even have memories of not being that way.
Thank you. I see lots of smiles and nods. I think you're touching chords again. And Lara, I guess you can see us. I'll hold my finger up when I get to 1
Yeah.
minute so you're not caught.
Got it. And I couldn't fix the video, but I was able to actually post a cute picture of a vermilion flycatcher. So I think
Oh my
that's
gosh.
what it is. Anyway. So for me, it's similar to Fatima actually. So I grew up in the Bahamas, a small island, Nassau, which was 21 miles by 7 miles. Certainly not a lot of extra resources available, but my dad was kind of like a modern day MacGyver, and we actually had a farm on another island, and I have such fond memories of that because he used an old water truck to catch rain. We had a generator that gave us power at night, and pretty much my entire day would be filled with running around the property and exploring. So I think I just have that natural love of the outdoors. Kind of fits that I'm now a Parks and Rec director. So I feel like that is my role and responsibility, right? I'm protecting the trees and the natural resources that everybody now and the future will enjoy. And how do I activate that space responsibly? I will say that in Miami, one of the coolest things that I got to experience while we were there is one of our natural resource areas. We discovered a species of orchid that was thought to be completely extinct. Myself and 3 other people are the only people that know the GPS location of that orchid because it is so valuable. But it's like amazing that we have this space that people drive by that probably think is overgrown, underutilized, but deep within the depths of it is this orchid that now we're working with the Fairchild Tropical Gardens locally to try to propagate it and bring it back. So that's very impactful for me. And here, you know, now moving to Tucson, now learning about desert environments, which is different. Personally, I'm on a hunt right now for a water truck of my very own because I bought 4 acres and I'm recreating a lot of that childhood experience. But, you know, it's a connection between the personal interest and the professional delivery that I can provide out to the kids and to adults. And I made mention before that we're looking at soil health, noted, Stuart. And basically, I'm excited about a project that we're working on with a company called West Consultants about building back soil health as we rebuild sports fields. The hope is not only will that help us with weed management, but also being able to use less water. We won't know until we try it out. But so those are kind of like the 3 pivotal, I would say, professional and personal experiences that drive me to continue to endeavor to make it better and sustainable.
Wow. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Natalie and Fatima, for this, a little glimpse into what drives you. How many folks who are listening are getting some of your own memories reignited just listening to them? Anyone? Yeah, like climbing a tree perhaps when we were 10 years old. Who knows what it might be? Yeah, very, all right, Marta. So let us continue with question 3, which is, what is an accomplishment that you feel good about in your work? And this can be a recent one, or it can be something way past, but just some work accomplishment about which you're feeling good. And we'll continue in our same order with Fatima.
Yes, I have to say the climate emergency declaration, it was the first piece of policy I ever wrote. And of course, I borrow from, you know, the work that other cities had done in the past. But the impact, well, before the impact, like I really enjoy the process, working with youth. And I love the place where the idea or the request or the demand came from. So it came from the 2019 climate strikes that were organized by youth. And so that happened through Arizona. And so here in Tucson, the youth, the Sunrise, the Arizona Youth Climate Coalition, they organized this strike that actually the mayor participated in. And during that strike, they basically asked the local leaders to declare climate emergencies. and act on climate. And so that happened in 2019. So 2020 came around, the mayor was, in office. And so she started working on this. I was hired, and I was tasked with completing this piece of policy and working with the youth to inform that. And so that was a very rewarding process for me, just drafting it together. And when it was adopted, it was such a huge deal because it is now one of the foundational documents or resolutions that is guiding some of the development of the policies or the plans that the city is putting together. That also led to, it's like the document that justifies a lot of the climate work that is currently happening. And so out of that came the EV readiness roadmap that I also worked on. And it's currently, some pieces of that are currently being implemented, but also the climate emergency declaration commits the city to develop and implement a climate action plan, which is also in the process. So I would say that's one of the documents that have had an impact on me. One, because it was the first policy document that I wrote, but two, because it has these ripple effect that it's become that guiding policy document that not only our office, but all other departments are using to explore and implement some of their programs and initiatives.
Thank you for that, Fatima. As you know, we were quite excited when that came out. Nice to know who had their hand on. All right, so Natalie?
I guess I will highlight probably one of the more recent things that I'm proud of, that I've been in this particular position for about 15 months now. And when I started, it was still, it was last year and we were kind of coming out of the pandemic, but the county, during COVID didn't respond the way that others did, such as the city or other businesses, with respect to allowing people to telecommute. And I think that was because of, just a kind of an older mindset of that, and thinking, not really understanding that people can be productive and work at home. And so the county really didn't allow that to happen really for a very long time. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. And ultimately, the county administrator was the board of supervisors were the reasons that they allowed it at one point in time. But then, as things started to get better and COVID seemed to be waning, then the support for that also, it was required, and then it just stopped. And so when I started, I was really a little bit befuddled by that, and I could also see we track emissions, through our travel reduction program. And we could see that just all these people during the pandemic telecommuting saved a huge amount of emissions. So, we, for many, many years, we have all these methods of trying to get people to drive less. Well, it turns out the pandemic kind of really nipped that in the bud really well. And we could see that teleworking, not only was it available and it worked, and we had data to show that people are actually still productive, but it still wasn't being supported. And so I worked with the former director of our department before she retired. And I kind of just convinced her that this is, and I don't think it took much convincing, because she actually supported telework quite a bit too. But I told her that I thought that it was something that we should really be trying to push at the county level. And so I worked with her. She was the one who ultimately did push that, but I helped to kind of implement that. And ultimately, when Pima County, when Chuck Huckleberry left and Jan Lesher came in, she did implement it just recently that anybody who is eligible through their job, a lot of the county jobs, telework is not something that's doable because people are in the field and things like that. But she now fully supports it. And so now we have a policy in place that if the the department head and your job allow for it, that you can actually telework up to 5 days a week now. And they also allowed for alternate work schedules. So now people can work 410s and 980s. And so we can see that we had a lot of teleworkers and then it dropped off, and we're hoping now that the policy has changed that people will get back to that even more. And then ultimately that will be a huge driver of reduced emissions for our own commuters. And that's really, I want to make sure that whatever we're trying to promote, that we're looking internally first and really we're putting our money where our mouth is before we try to get others to do it. So that I feel is a pretty big accomplishment.
Very impressive. And sometimes the solutions are thrown into our lap against our will, but then you maintained the will, or you ignited some real will so that that solution could be implemented more routinely instead of just at time of emergency. That's leadership. So we're going to look at now, this is apparently the last question formally planned, which is two. What issues or needs are most pressing to you now? And the corollary is, how can we help? And you may take we as the people on the screen right here. You could take it as Sustainable Tucson. You could take it as the city, county population as a whole. So let us know who the we are that you're thinking about when you answer that question. So what issues or needs feel most pressing to you, and how can we help?
Did we
Did I leave one out?
did we get Lara to answer the
We did not. I knew something was missing. Thank you,
It was
Fatima.
okay. I was just gonna go with the flow. It was all right.
Larry, you are so humble, but go ahead.
Okay, so I'll make it quick. So
3 minutes.
First accomplishment, I would say, and just because I know it's not a local accomplishment, but over in Miami, sea level rise and the impact to shorelines from hurricanes is a pretty significant thing that they're going through there. And I was able to be part of a couple different grant applications where we got the funding to do mangrove restoration at a 32-acre parcel of water. It was the only beach property that we had in our inventory, but it was pretty amazing. So mangroves are different colors, red, black, and white, and replanting them in where we were able to get a lot of youth involved in it, to the point that we did it for so many consecutive years that we had kids that came out initially as 6-7-year-olds coming back as 18-year-olds, helping to continue planting, and then seeing the original mangroves towering over them. So it's a fascinating and amazing experience to watch that come in, and then also to see less and less of the sand erosion because of the mangroves that were put in that became heavily forested. So I definitely would say that's one of the memories or accomplishments that always sticks with me from that angle. And then here looking at just the ARPA funds that I mentioned, the ARP funds that I mentioned before, where we're able to match those dollars to allow us to increase tree canopy, specifically tree canopy in low-income neighborhoods. When you look at the heat map and where we have shade now versus where we need shade, the fact that our parks are going to be able to deliver some of the solution increasing shade canopy, and that we had the dollars in order to facilitate the planting of those trees. That's a legacy that's going to probably outlive whatever number of years that I have the privilege to be with the department, but I'll always be able to look back on that. Just like with the mangroves, I see them growing in for every year that I did a grant application with our park naturalists. Here we have the testament, right? We have the testament of how they sustained during the hurricanes and the testament of the kids who came back to see it grow through. Same thing's going to happen here with all of these trees that we are actively now trying to get in the ground, and the variety of trees too. I mean, I've really enjoyed learning about the different types of trees that we have, and then seeing them actually flourish once they're planted. So we're planting for the future. And I think that that is the #1 outcome for me professionally, regardless of the entity that I've worked with, is that everything I do each year is about future investment. And right now, the heavy focus is on things that are climate friendly, water conservation friendly, and heat, and trying to reduce that heat index. And so I think that's something that I get to be proud of every day.
Wow, there is an old saying, apparently from the Greeks, that it is a good, this is a paraphrase, it is a good civilization, it is a wise civilization whose people plant trees in shade that will never sit.
I've seen that before, and I love that. And I think of that, I even think about that with my own property. In Miami, I put in a rainbow eucalyptus, which is a fast growing tree, but it gets super tall. And I plan to drive by to see if they kept it, but I always envisioned that when I left that house, one day it would shade somebody else, and that would be really cool. So, yeah.
Wow, thank you, thank you. And shall we now go to question 4? Are we good now for that? What issues or needs feel most pressing to you now, and how can we help? And Fatima, go ahead.
Yes, similar to the second or third question, it is hard to pick one because, I don't think there's like, I mean, when we talk about climate action, there is not one solution that is a silver bullet for everything, right? So we need to decarbonize, but we also need nature-based solutions. We need infill development and like walkability, but we also, need to do a transition to EVs. And so, so when we're talking about climate action, there is an array of strategies that collectively have an impact. But I do have to say, like right now at this precise moment, for me, one of the most pressing issues, and that's because it's coming up in the agenda on Tuesday, their mayor and council would be voting on the EV ready ordinance that would essentially requires new commercial, multifamily, and retail building to have some level of EV readiness. And this is important as we plan for the future, because the buildings that are built today will last 30 to 50 years. And so knowing also that the EV market is going that way, we are experiencing historical investment on climate action, including that EV transition. So it's critical and important that this EV ordinance is EV ready ordinance, is approved. And that's just one step. That's just one piece of the entire climate action puzzle, but it's a very important one because the impact that it has on buildings that are going to be here for the next 50 years, we can start planning for that future. And going back, retrofitting, open up the ground, it's so much more expensive and destructive as well. And so planning for the future now makes perfect sense. And the way that you can help, we are going to, Mayor and Council is going to be discussing that item on Tuesday, and there will be called to the audience at 5:30. So if you want to come and support it, that would be awesome. But you can also email and send letters. That support is always appreciated. And I'm happy to share some of the details of what the ordinance entails, but yeah.
Thank you. Yes, to all those things. If you want to put something in the chat or send it to me and I can put it out by email. And we'd love to know the difference between doing it at call to audience versus sending something ahead of time to either a staff aide or the council member in particular, which you think is more advantageous, if either.
I think call to the audience would be a little better just because, you know, it's in the moment and the vote happens in the moment. And I mean, this process started last summer. So it took a whole year, over 10 meetings, 2 public comments period. And then the vote, it's really, you know, really in the moment. So just having the that support at the moment, I think it's very impactful. Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. All right, Natalie.
So I would say, I guess the short answer to the most pressing issue, I think broadly for me, is climate change. And that's just because it is just such an existential threat. And also, I feel like it is so connected to all these other environmental issues. It's kind of like what is driving a lot of the problems that we have. So whether you're talking about invasive species or even the pandemic, water issues, like really there can be some connection, I think, to the fact that humans are contributing to changing the climate of the earth. And so I think, though, for me, another topic that I have been involved in for a lot of years is food production. And that's a piece of it that I think doesn't get enough attention. And I believe, unfortunately, that it's going to be a really big threat for populations around the world, that we are not going to have the food that we need because of the fact that we're not preparing ourselves for the changes in the climate. And nor do we even have the ability to know exactly enough to how to prepare for that. But I think that is something that we can really see, and we are already seeing it throughout the world with climate refugees and the refugee problems. I think many of those, including what's happening at our own border, are linked to the fact that people are struggling to eat and they are trying to find ways to survive. And so I do think that the connection with food production and climate change is something that we really need to be focused quite a bit on. And I'm still involved in that particular topic. I'm on the board of directors with the Community Gardens of Tucson. And I do think local food production could be a way to help solve that problem, and also build community, and also decrease the emissions that are associated with the transport of food. So that's I'll wrap it up right now, sir. That's the issue that I think really could be using a bit more attention.
Rosie, thank you. And we've got Christy, who I think is still listening on the phone. She is in Sierra Vista, actually, and is very big on native foods, and is a native foods educator. So we have someone right here who's looked into this a great deal. So maybe you and she will have a chance to talk sometime. Let's go to Lara.
So I think the biggest challenges that we're experiencing in Parks and Recreation right now is boy, it's even hard for me to pick one. There's a lot, but if I looked at it from a sustainability, environmental standpoint, I really do believe that folks need to get involved when we're doing a community survey or a master plan process within your area park, or even regional park. Like right now, Reed Park Master Plan is currently in a master planning process. And the reason for that is we struggle sometimes to really hear the voice of the residents and what is a priority for them in the park. And also if they're open to us making changes, whether the change is for increased recreation opportunity or increased, say, GSI, storm to shade projects to go into a park, we always want to be mindful of what the public at large will embrace. And then also to participate in the volunteer events, whether it's through the mayor's office or the council office or each of the individual departments in the city, we do a variety of clean up to green up, tree plantings. And so putting some of the sweat equity into your public areas is also very vital and important. I know, Stuart, you and I have talked a lot about HEML, and we have an amazing group that are dedicated to us as a department not using chemicals for weed abatement. And the department is trying to lend to that philosophy of management, and the residents themselves are helping with pulling the weeds that are the bane of their existence, the goat heads. But I think that when the department is in the stance that we are, and we're lending that framework to work with you, I think it's always good when it's a collaborative plan, and also being able to see both sides. I think you started out, Stuart, with saying like sometimes the bigger entities, you can look at them and say, well, why aren't they doing things a certain way? Try to understand what our perspective sometimes can be, or what's driving a decision that we have to make in that moment of time. I think that sometimes I run into folks that feel like it's their way or the highway. And I think it's more about, can we get to a middle point where you get a win and I get a win? And that's more consensus building, or collaboration towards a better outcome. I forgot the second question.
You've been answering it, Lara,
Okay.
which is, how can we help? You said,
Okay.
give us some sweat equity.
Yeah, give us some sweat equity. And then also just be responsive when we do ask for feedback. Nothing is more disheartening when you put out an opportunity for getting input and maybe you get 5 responses. Though I will say and give props that through the pandemic, and we've refined the way we've done community engagement and provided the opportunities to get involved, we have seen an increased response percentage to our surveys. And so I do appreciate that, but just don't give up on that engagement, because that's really the only way that I can be respectful of what you communicate out is your needs.
Thank you. That harkens back to the conversation that Natalie was in last year. Don't forget us was what the 3 participants that evening kept saying. And don't let the elected officials forget you either. Don't let them forget what we're working on. Those are some of the refrains.
Very true.
And by the way, Robin is here also, who's been so intimately involved in that Himmel Park project. So it's great to have so many of us gathered today. We are going to take our break. We are right on time. And thank you, all 3 of you, for your answers.
Good. There we go.
I'll check the chat and see if there's one there. Okay, speaking of questions, Fatima put in the chat box a PDF file for frequently asked questions on the EV Ready ordinance, and I'll be sure to also send that to everybody afterwards in case it's not easy for you to copy that now. Well, Trace, what's your question? And then Kevin.
My question is, we say that climate change is something that needs an all hands on deck approach. But there's governmental efforts and there's citizen efforts, as well as business and everything else we can think of. What do you see is the importance of citizen initiated efforts, and what are the city or county doing to support those?
Natalie.
Go ahead. I'll let Fatima answer for the city, but I actually believe it's really, really important that citizens become involved, because I do believe that government often is, the decisions that government leaders make are often driven by what they're hearing. Then they should be driven by what they're hearing from their constituents. So the more that they hear from folks that this is a particular issue that needs to be addressed, that there needs to be a focus. In our case, we're really working hard on just at the county level, like what we're doing internally with our county operations. And I feel like there's still a really long way to go just in that realm of things. We do have a sustainable action plan for Pima County, and that outlines our goals that are aligned with the Paris Climate Accords. And so we are working diligently to try to get our facilities upgraded and to transition our own fleet into EV vehicles. Again, what I do with the trying to promote alternate modes definitely falls in that. There are a wide variety of things that the county is doing internally with their operations with wastewater. Wastewater is a big contributor for our own greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're working to try to reduce the energy that's needed for wastewater treatment. So there's a wide variety of things that just at the, if you just look at the county level, what we're doing internally, we still have a long way to go. But as far as like just keeping it in the forefront of those decision makers' minds, I do think it does slip. And I do see that it's oftentimes there's so many things that they have to focus on that climate change maybe sometimes just feels like a really big, like, you know, a big problem, but they do have to constantly be reminded that is something that's important. But I do think it's also like with businesses, the way that choose the businesses that you want to support. I've seen that we've seen that I think in a variety of ways, that businesses aren't necessarily being required by governments to do things, but they're changing the way they do things. One, because pretty much everything that you could look at that's addressing climate change is addressing waste, which also ultimately reduces costs, right? So oftentimes those upfront costs, but over time, over a 5 or 10 year period, you reduce the cost because you're reducing waste. So I think that supporting businesses that support that ideology is something that people can do too. So just like I said last time, really making sure that when you interact with the elected officials, your local elected officials, that they understand the importance of it, and that you are helping them kind of guide your own thoughts about what those entities can do, and they will listen to you. I can tell you that right now, that when I get a complaint or a comment that goes directly to a board of supervisor, it's being acted on immediately. So it's a good way to ensure that by just letting them know what your priorities are and the different, being constructive about it and giving concrete ideas is always a great way to go, rather than just the broad complaints. But I would encourage you to really stay involved with your elected officials, because they do want to hear from you and they will act on it.
I could not agree more to everything that was said. I often hear the mayors say we all have a role to play, from city government to the business sector and community members. And the story that I showed earlier in terms of like how the climate action came about, this came from individuals. This came from like the people, the Tucsonans that wanted this to happen. So that, in itself was the beginning of many other actions and strategies. And so it is very important that you all share your thoughts. I can also tell you from working, even before we had a climate action consultant working in like the community survey and then the community climate dialogues, and I'm just going to drop this link because I think it's important for you to have it, but that's the link where essentially we're keeping track of all the community engagement that is taking place around climate action. And so if you look at the community, at the climate listening sessions report, you can see how we are essentially tracking and looking at the takeaways, that input, that these dialogues, and even the survey are, indicating what the constituents and the community wants to see in climate action. And so all of these initiatives are really going to influence the strategies that will come out of the plan. And just like Natalie shared, like those strategies and those plans become priorities, become programs. And so, like the community plays a huge role, even in the Tucson Million Trees initiative. A lot of the plantings require, and partnerships require community buy-in. I am a strong believer that in order for a project or a program to be sustainable, you do need community buy-in and ownership. Not only like, oh, I support this, but yeah, this is in my neighborhood and I want to make sure that these trees or this green infrastructure is functional and survives over time. So I am taking ownership of these project, right? And a clear example of that is the partnership between TNT, Storm to Shade, the private sectors. The mayor has done an excellent job at bringing private funding dollars for the Tucson Million Trees. And so like the way that those projects are designed with their partners at Tucson Clean and Beautiful Trees for Tucson is with community members. So they decide what goes into the design, the conceptual design. And so the private sector invests on it, and then Storm to Shade comes in and provides green infrastructure, but also funding for the maintenance of those sites. So it's like a three-way, and that's like I always see as that perfect example of that community, business sector, and government partnerships and relationships, and that's a model that has shown to work, and so it's a good model to replicate in other things and other projects, but definitely we as individuals have a huge role to play. And you all have, like, you're already doing a lot of amazing work. I certainly do appreciate all of the very specific suggestions that you share with us. Your letters, believe it or not, like your letters have a lot of the things that, you know, we know are the right thing to do. And so a lot of those letters, a lot of those recommendations will be reflected in like some of the work that we're doing. So those very specific recommendations, like Natalie shared, are pretty much appreciated. And I always think also like, you know, we all have blind spots. And so having different community members provide perspectives really, you know, it has a huge benefit, because in many ways, even the listening sessions, we learn from the people that are at the front lines. We learn from the folks that are experiencing these on the day-to-day. And many times, like, there might not know like the you know, climate jargon, but they are experiencing this on a day-to-day. And so like those shared experiences, shared concerns, and proposed solutions do you know, bring a very different perspective and unique perspective. So I do appreciate all of that. And collective action, you know, it's very beneficial and really increases the benefits that we'll receive by one particular project. So yes, I hope I answered that question more or less.
Thank you both. Let's hear from Kevin.
Yeah, my question's for Natalie. You opened up, Natalie, by talking a little bit about the medical sterilization facility that was permitted in the county. And your point about, well, you have to permit it, kind of caught my attention. And I'm wondering, do you think you have all the tools and resources to adequately address environmental justice considerations in the permitting process? Because a lot of cities and local governments and states across the country are trying to figure out, what can we do? What can we change with our legal framework and our permitting criteria so that we do a better job of considering environmental justice in the process?
I'm glad you brought that up. I do have strong opinions about it. And the answer to your question is we absolutely do not have much in the way of policy. There's really nothing. As far as what I'm required to do, it's really outreach, but ultimate, and like I said in the beginning, kind of making sure that the communities that would be impacted are aware and can be part of that process. But ultimately, we have guidelines that are dictated to us through the Clean Air Act. And those guidelines are very specific, and we can try to be as stringent as we can within those guidelines. for our permitting authority, it comes from the state of Arizona, and we're not allowed to be more stringent than the state. So if we had the ability, if the state gave us the authority to implement local environmental justice rules, then I think that we would try to pursue that. But it is just not even anything that we can consider, because that is embedded within our rules that that the state, we can't be more stringent than that. And I will say that I keep up with these topics up a lot. And at the federal level, the Biden administration is very, very focused on this topic. They have and really incorporated this idea of environmental and social justice within really all the federal programs. And so they're doing things like providing grant funding in various ways to address it, but there's still not policy that's there. There's not any policy that I'm even hearing being talked about to be incorporated into something like the Clean Air Act. So until that happens, then we can't just make things up. But what we can do is kind of deal with what some of those issues are. And so in the case of locally, so in the case of Becton Dickinson, what happened was that the city provides the authority to locate businesses in certain areas through their zoning rules. And that particular site that they chose, it was zoned for industrial, and that's what they are. And I'm not quite sure, and maybe Fatima, maybe you could chime in on this too. I don't know, I don't think that the city leaders really understood this business when it was approved, or even could anticipate that this would be a problem or be contributing to environmental injustices in our community, because I don't believe the city would want that to happen. And in fact, certainly the leaders have expressed that they're very frustrated by the fact that this is happening. But actually where it's located is what we can work on, I think, locally. So if we can head it off at a zoning level and maybe incorporate at the city level more review of hazardous waste and hazardous materials that might be coming out of these types of industries, then we can cite them in other areas. I think that we all can agree that we want our medical equipment to be sterilized, right? Like we don't want to go into the hospital and not have that. So it's an important industry. The problem is that they've decided to put it in an area that has the landfill, I-10, Tucson Electric Power, very close to where the TCE contamination was, where now PFAS is dealing with. So it's like one thing after another. And it wasn't something that was really became an issue until it was too late. And so, and what I mean too late is that, I mean, like I said, if the company goes through the application process and puts in the pollution control devices that are required by the Clean Air Act, then Pima County doesn't have the discretionary authority to say, we can't issue you the permit. So we really are stuck here at this point now. And so I think that the city and county really could be working more closely together to maybe incorporate some additional environmental justice reviews in the zoning process before it gets to us. So that would be something I think that we can definitely work on. And in fact, the city is, just this week, I saw that the city had put out a call for feedback on planning and zoning rules. And I provided that feedback. So there, hopefully we can work together the thing is, there are examples of other locations in the country. New Jersey is the one I heard of most recently, where they are incorporating environmental justice reviews before they actually locate industries. And so, it's just a matter of, creating new policy, local policy, that we can make sure that the businesses, whatever they're going to be doing, don't harm local communities. And I will say, I do think that our permitting process does a pretty darn good job of protecting people. But at the same time, when you're dealing with hazardous air pollutants like ethylene oxide, it's very small quantities that can harm people. And sometimes the rules that are in place through the Clean Air Act don't move fast enough with the science. So the epidemiology might show that those levels might need to be lowered, but it's a process it takes to actually get there. So that can be problematic, but we do the best we can with what we have. But I do think we could be doing more by working together on that topic.
And Kevin, or you tell us what it is that you're talking about? I mean, I don't know the specific.
Well, you know, I don't want to get into it. I just think, and I know there are problems in the state legislature and the governor's office that makes it hard for the large cities in Arizona to be more proactive, because they tend to, you know, if you do something, well, some industry association is going to come to the legislature and say, no, we don't want this. But I do think that you need to be prepared that we maybe get a Democratic governor. Democrats might get control of one or both houses. And I would hope that you would join with Phoenix and other large cities that are dealing with environmental justice and Tucson and go forward with a legislative agenda that would give you the authority, because I doubt you probably have the authority to do a cumulative impact analysis, is my guess.
Well, we do work with the university and the College of Public Health to get information on that. But again,
can you use that information to incorporate that into the decision you're going to make on the permit? Probably not.
We can make the permit as stringent as we possibly can within the guidelines that we have, and that's what we've done. And so it is good to have that information, but because we just don't have that leverage beyond the rules that we're working with, and we have had Democratic governors in the past, and it still worked that way. So I think it would be really, really difficult to get to the point where local government like Pima County or Maricopa County could be more stringent. But I do think it doesn't have to be necessarily something that's written in law. It can be something that locally we're deciding to do these things just on our own until we get preempted by the state, which is often the case. I don't think there are any preemption laws that I'm aware of that keep local city governments from creating their own zoning ordinances. But I think we do have the opportunity to be doing more. It's just that unfortunately the permitting process has a disconnect because there's the municipal side and the county side, and they don't necessarily mesh. So if we mesh them together and we work together to try to make sure that we can head it off before it becomes a problem, then I think that we could have some success.
One tactical approach you might consider is getting the information to create that overall aggregate perspective and publish that, even if you can't apply it. That would maybe help the political process.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in replicating what works. And so there definitely are areas, like I said, New Jersey, Oregon is another place where they've implemented environmental justice reviews and locally that seem to be working. So I think that we could definitely pull that information together and work together. But of course, I'm at the county, so I would have to, again, work with Fatima or the people at the city, or even not just the city of Tucson, the other jurisdictions too, to implement these types of reviews so that we can make sure that these types of facilities, we're not going to be able to stop them from coming into town, but we want to just make sure that they're properly located. It's really not any more complex than that.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, yes, so the mayor and the council did express, during the mayor and council meeting, their opposition, but similarly, the zoning allows that type of construction to happen, but certainly, like, I would encourage you all to, be engaged in the process, because the Planning and Development Service Department is currently getting feedback on precisely that. And so there have been some conversations and thoughts of specifically, as it relates to climate, the built environment and buildings are a huge contributor of greenhouse gases. So that's going to be a big part of the strategies that we address to achieve the climate goals. And so part of that process is what kind of development, new development, existing development, do we need to really reach our climate goals? And what does it mean to have a climate adaptive development, protocols? And so participating in those processes, it's really important. Also internally within the city, there has to be more alignment in terms of you know, working and inserting climate sustainability within the different departments. The new strategic plan for economic initiatives, for example, now has, you know, climate action within that. And so, you know, those type of initiatives and those type of like looking within and also in collaboration, what are the things that could be done? And so that, you know, things like this don't happen again. It's extremely important, and your participation too, so that, you know, everybody, mayor and council knows that this is something that the Tucson community as a whole wants and needs and deserves. So yeah, I would just encourage you to take part of that process, because that's going to influence how the, you know, how we move forward when it comes to the built environment and zoning and regulations.
Thank you, Fatima. I'm not seeing other hands. I see that we're coming close to the end. So I'd like to try a very short question to Fatima and a slightly longer one for Lara. Fatima, would it be helpful to you if we gave you names of some sustainable building experts with whom we've had contact? One's on our board, and he founded the Development Center for Appropriate Technology, for example. Would those names be useful for you as you're working on that aspect of the climate change plan?
Sure. Yeah, I do have these. I'm working on this database of people and local experts within our community, and many of you are there. So, so I'm so happy that you're offering that. And yes, please share them my way. There are different phases. Right now, we're in phase 1 of the Climate Action Plan community engagement, but phase 2, we're gonna look more at solutions. And so I would certainly love those experts. So please do send them my way.
Okay, thank you. Lara, if you're still here, there's a pretty picture there. And and you can defer this if it's too long to answer. But I was wondering, Steve Kozaczek sent me the sort of a guidance manual of several pages about sort of how to do pesticides, herbicides, or not to do those, etc. And that was the first thing I ever saw that was more than that one-page inverted pyramid that indicated the organic first philosophy. So 2 questions, and we can do it later if this takes too long. Do you have access to that document that Steve sent me? If so, does that give flesh to that beautiful visual pyramid? And if not, how do we go about getting something that gives more concrete guidance that gets out to your employees and to the contractors who aren't even your employees?
So actually, I think Steve got the document from me.
Okay, so you've got it.
So I have it. It is something that we have actually, in partnership with University of Arizona, trained our staff on.
Okay.
It was a document that was created, and I have to give her a lot of credit, Irene Ortega, as well as some additional folks that assisted. And then when Blue came on board, I believe she may have done a final review before the actual formalization of the document. For me, the way I look at it is that is a guiding document. Certainly there's a lot of things that we are actually applying and holding to within it. And the reason why we did the training in partnership with U of A was to make sure the staff fully understood what we are asking of them to prioritize. And then also through Blue's rolling out of more GSI and related information, we've been doing both in-person kind of indoor training as well as physical hands-on training on GSI management and practices that need to be held, as well as Nicole has set up a couple of in-person training sessions with Randall Port from Urban Forestry. He's a well-regarded arborist here in town, so that we can better educate our staff too. Our staff are not required or asked to do significant tree maintenance. But sometimes in the time of monsoon is a great example. We do have branches that fall, or we have conditions that become unsafe. And we need them to know the right way to approach it so that we can have a better management if in the event that the vendor on contract is unable to respond quickly. So I believe that does answer your question. The document is something that we annually are going to be revisiting with the staff. And then as we hire new staff, get them into the training of it as well. And then to your other question about how do we get to more concrete guidelines, there has been, sorry, go ahead.
If we need them,
Yeah.
I didn't know how much more you might want.
I think that what we are still doing is measuring what is actually sustainable in terms of an implementation practices. A good example of something we just started doing, we're working with EGSD as they're producing their own compost now. And this summer, when we were going through and doing turf maintenance, we were top dressing a lot of our sports fields with that compost. Well, what was available? They weren't able to give us enough for all of them, but it's just interesting that instead of going and top dressing with sand or dirt, we were actually top dressing with compost. So looking at reintroducing the biological benefits of what compost offers into a turf field environment. So I really do feel like the city in terms of those practices, we're still figuring out what is working. And then that when we say we're going to adopt this as 100% a method, that it's sustainable. And that's the space I think that we're going to be in for a little while. And then also water, transportation, and parks. You know, all of our areas, our open space areas are a little different, but we have one thing that's in common, which is we have maintenance crews that are roaming and traveling. And so keeping up that education and awareness is like the #1 focus right now, making sure that they're buying into it, understanding the why, and that the long term, once we embrace more and more of these practices that help to say deter weeds, it is ultimately less work, physical work that they have to do when they're in the field.
Well, thank you. And I see Fatima nodding with recognition, and Robin looks happy. We're going to continue this conversation, Robin. Speaking of whom, well, let's first say thank you to Lara, Natalie, and Fatima. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. 1, for your service. 2, for your taking the time on a Saturday morning to tell us about your service and where you're coming from. We all come from somewhere, and we all have stories that are meaningful, and when they're shared in ways that others can hear, are meaningful to others as well. And I think you each did that for us. You made that little glimpse of your background and your intent meaningful to each of us. I hope that more people get to learn things like that about you. We will look forward to more collaboration with you. And so let's keep the communication flowing. So feel free to just float or fly away as you wish, whatever vehicle you have at your hands, or stick around if you'd like to hear, because we're going to have a brief presentation by Trace, Richard, and Janelyn about resilience in our neighborhoods. There's a bit of an assignment aspect to this. I'm going to ask those who are not the speakers to actually choose one of the 8 parts of the 8-part framework to listen for. And when you hear that, to write it down, type it, whatever, however you do it, make a picture, but to choose, if each of us will choose one of those 8 parts, then we can give them feedback on that one part that they did. And so this is where sharpening our ears and then perhaps sharpening their awareness as well. Before we do that, Robin, I wrote it down, but do you want to give your 3-sentence introduction to your projects that you wrote up the other day?
Hi, thank you. We're on the beginning phases of some really exciting projects, and I just wanted to invite anyone who wants to be a part of habitat restoration. We've got some large projects that are happening in the city and a little bit south of the city. Please send an email to me at Robin, ROBIN, at sustainabletucson.org. If you're interested. Just really quickly, we're going to be working on some regenerative land care with farming. So it'll include obviously organics with food and soil health, and restoring some areas that have been damaged by fire, for example. And then Himmel Park is in the works in the queue with the city. So Robin at sustainabletucson.org. And thank you everybody for all your great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Great to see you this morning. Okay, so the part 1 of the 8-part framework is the attention step. Just raise your hand if you'd like to be the one to listen for the attention step. Okay, Marta's got that one. Okay, step 2 is the needs step. Okay, Anne's going to listen for the need. Okay, 3 is the wholeness. The main idea of this presentation is, okay, let's see. Okay, Donna, thank you. Great. Okay, overview. It's telling us where we're going to go or what we're going to hear about. Okay, Bridget. The body is the main ideas, and that may be the most scribe-worthy job, because there should be more than one main idea. Okay, Kevin, thank you. And then the closing, there's the summary, there's the point, and there's the benefit. What do you think, Laura? Are you up to listening for one of those?
For which one? Sorry.
Oh, Lara, you're gonna stay. Great.
I'm gonna try and stay. I'm waiting to get a call for a delivery, but
okay. Well, would you just like to tune your ear to how they close?
Sure.
Yeah. We have 3 parts officially, but it doesn't always come out that way. Summary, point, and benefit.
I didn't realize we had a Laura.
Yes, we do.
Too. Sorry.
Laura, did you want to? No, you're going to listen. Okay. So, all right. Take them away.
Okay. There are actually 3 parts to this presentation, but as preface, the challenges we're facing in the years ahead involve, among many other things, transforming ourselves from a world where everything depends on fossil fuels to a world where nothing does. The real challenge is to figure out how to do that affordably, because transforming everything is not going to be cheap. But in fact, there are a whole lot of approaches that are actually cost savings. So we're going to be using the topic of water as the way to get into some seemingly diverse issues. The first presentation will be by Richard, who will be talking about how we can make minor changes to the city to dramatically improve the efficiency and affordability and accessibility of this community without making major changes to it. The second presentation will be by Jan, who will talk about some of the tools that are available to us to make a key element of that transformation, namely making our neighborhoods beautiful, safe, shaded, and fun. And finally, I'll come in and review our actual water situation and describe how much water we have and what our neighborhoods would become like if we make use of it. So we haven't actually run through this yet, so we'll see how it goes. Richard, you want to take it, or?
All right, thanks, Trace. So I'll say the way I got involved with this topic is that I was looking for a topic, and Trace had many, and then he had one that he really liked more than the others, even though I chose the other one. I chose the water one. He wanted this one. So that's how I got involved. And he was calling his resilient neighborhoods urban villages. I'm going to try to share my screen, except I can't. Okay, never mind.
Richard, I'm going to make you a co-host.
Yay.
Okay, coming right up. It is now done.
Let's see, did I share my screen? I'll try again.
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't look good. How about that one? Oh man, this is complicated. This may not happen.
A separate show of some kind, or do you want me to show that one slide I sent you?
I have two documents that I was going to put together that I was going to try to show, but I don't really know how to do that.
Richard,
So,
are they open on your desktop?
Yeah, they're open.
So when you hit share screen, you get some choices. You don't see any of those on the choices?
No.
Sometimes they're kind of in disguise. You have to look at it. So wait a minute, is that
It says
one?
I have to open system preferences, and I'm not sure exactly how to do all that. And
Okay.
I don't know about this. Anyway, I'm not sure where to find this.
Okay.
But maybe another time. Sorry that I'm not as tech savvy as some of everybody else. Anyway, so I guess so I talked to Trace, for a little bit, and then he sent me an article he had written about this idea of resilient neighborhoods and urban villages. And I guess I don't know where it all started, but as I see it, the goals are, make the neighborhoods more accessible and convenient, create carless mobility, build sustainable resilience through local community, and combat food and retail deserts. So it all sounds great, right? Sure. Who would say no? And then, Trace kind of broke it down a little bit, and I tried to organize it into what made sense to me. So I guess it starts with the home zones that he calls home zones, which are basically residential areas. No, I can't find mine. Anyway, residential areas that to support social interaction. And they have minimal auto traffic and have a lot of traffic calming features. The second, bigger, it grows out to be a planned neighborhood with nearby retail and community centers, maybe 2 to 3 miles away. They're going to have some neighborhood centers with both civic and commercial functions, centralized meeting places. And I guess the main thing is that it's going to be convenient for walking and biking and maybe golf courts, and also convenient for local public transit. And then the bigger picture to that is the urban village network. And basically that's just public transport connectivity to other villages and other neighborhoods. So I thought that sounded interesting, but I'm trying to figure out how the hell Tucson is going to make that happen. So I did a little research, which is not on this sheet that Trace has. And I realized that there were a lot of practical and established urban planning concepts that kind of relate to this. One would be something called transit-oriented development, which supposedly maximizes the amount of residential, business, and leisure space, and it's also convenient to public transport. They have centralized high-density areas which spread out to lower density areas, and they have with convenient transit connectivity. So this actually started happening after World War II in a lot of towns in Japan, Sweden, France, the Netherlands, and Denmark. So that's transit-oriented development. The next thing that sort of, as I see it, comes along is something called ecological urbanism, which is the principles are kind of socially inclusive and environmentally sensitive. And the main objectives of ecological urbanism is compactness, complexity, efficiency, and stability. I wasn't aware of I wasn't able to find any examples of that. But the next thing is green urbanism, which the description of that is that it creates communities beneficial to humans and the environment. The principles are something that most of us would appreciate: zero fossil fuel, zero waste, and zero emissions. And a couple of cities that are actually put this into place are Copenhagen and Singapore. The third and final urban planning concept that kind of relates to this is called new urbanism. And that it promotes environmentally friendly habits by creating walkable neighborhoods with varied housing and job types. And the main principles for this new urbanism is building community, ecology concepts, transit-oriented development, which we've discussed already, and traditional neighborhood development. Now, there are numerous examples of where this is being put in place. Miami, San Antonio, Texas, Jersey City, New Jersey, a bunch of other places around the world, but also a big area is called Melbourne, Australia. So that's sort of, what I've gotten to. I realize there's a lot more information here than I can put together in 5 minutes. But I just wanted to share some basic concepts. And that the fact, I think what's intriguing to me was that it does exist in a lot of places and has been put into place after these cities have been developed. There are a bunch of cities that were created like green belts, which have a centralized urban area and then the residences and then a green belt around them. But that would be too late in Tucson to do that. So these are areas that have actually put some of these actions into place. And with that, I will stop, and no idea how long it took me.
Wasn't timing it, but it's great stuff.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, great. I'm ready. I get to do something that I think is really going to be sort of, I hope you find as interesting as I did when Trey shared it with me. The first time I saw it, I was doing a happy dance. I kept saying, wow, what? At any rate, I'm going to be talking about some applications and also the just how I see how doable this really can be. So we start out with, and also just want to draw attention to the title. It's Every Neighborhood Can Become a Food Oasis in the Sonoran Desert. Kind of hold that thought. This first slide is a 4 square mile visual landmass. And I think for me, what I did was I put myself in the middle and I went 2 miles north, 2 miles south, 2 miles east and west, and realized that I'm already in a sprouting urban village. So that was kind of fun for me to discover. And can we have the next slide? Oh, yes, thank you. And we can keep going. You can see this area view. Okay, part of what this, back. If you'll back up just a sec. We're looking at scale. And when we think in terms of doable, we think about the smallest unit, the house. And we can see then, if you want to go ahead, I'm sorry, you can go ahead. I just wanted to mention that house scale. There you have the backyard garden. Very doable. It's already happening. You have 3D and vertical trellises. I went online and started looking at trellises and realized what a powerful tool trellises are for building building out, creating shade and beauty and that sort of thing. We have the aquaponics, we have living walls. This is utilization of water. It's harvesting and using water. We have edible landscapes, and you've seen them already around town. They're already happening right here. And I'll just mention too about edible landscapes. I mean, we've had that wonderful presentation that Christy and that they did, and talking about native seeds. Well, our trees, we have the mesquite, we have fruit trees, we have legumes. It's just amazing how much food is possible in our neighborhoods. And then this is a cluster scale, and that just means several families may work on projects together and create either a gathering place, or they may be working on a project like this where there's it's slowing traffic, and they're actually using edible landscape. More talk about the traffic calming. And then I wanted to speak to, especially to neighborhood gathering spots. This is a real opportunity for building community, connecting. And there are a variety of different ways that folks can do that. One of the things we see here is the shade, the structure that's creating shade, folks standing underneath and talking. We have a larger scale community garden. So we're moving into the broader space concept. More community gardens. I mean, look, and this is, of course, the block scale. So you've got the different pieces. And any intersection can become a neighborhood center. Just check out those pictures. And I really appreciate the one on the lower right-hand side where it was all cement, and they put together ingeniously a little park. Okay, yep, playgrounds, more community gardens. So what I want to say is that as you're looking at these, that urban villages can really help us do what Trace talks about, make our neighborhoods fantastic. Think gardens, parks, think beauty, vibrance, aliveness, shade, and fun. And as I look at this and consider it, there are biopsychosocial benefits to organizing around this concept of urban village. There's a sense of identity, of belonging, a sense of calm and safety. And for me, it grows into the sense of culture. And it's a foundational mechanism for building community, for learning and acting and networking. And for me, what I see us doing with all of these examples is cultivating ground, but also cultivating the social field. And that's really an invitation for human intelligence, creativity, and regenerative living. So we're doing food, water, we're dealing with transit issues, we're creating shade, dealing with heat. Now I believe Trace is going to talk a little bit more about the water.
Thank you. Just a time check, we're at 5 to 12.
Okay, let me figure out. Okay, I'm going to talk about water as the key feature to actually making a transformation of Tucson. As I said, we're changing from a world where everything depends on fossil fuels to a world where none of it does. But that's going to create a whole lot of challenges. As we live here in Tucson, a lot of people say, well, how can we live in Tucson? It's a desert and we don't have any water. Well, that's actually not only not true, it's not even close. We have more wet water than we're supposed to get from the Colorado River by a substantial amount. The question is, how do we do something with it? Well, the mayor has the Million Tree initiative, but the challenge we have is to figure out how do you add a million additional trees without using groundwater. Well, it turns out that's not so much the problem. The problem is, how do we deal with all that water? Right now, the critical thing to understand is that the size matters when it comes to harvesting water. And in this case, small is better. This funny graph you see here, the vertical axis is the percent of annual rainfall that runs off a watershed of a particular size. The farther you go to the left, the smaller the watershed, the larger is to the right. And this is a log scale, so each mark is 10 times larger than the previous one. I was at a webinar a couple of days ago where the city official was talking about a new park that the city is working on using water harvesting. And it turns out that it's about a 1 square mile watershed and a 1 acre catchment area. Well, if you look at where 1 square mile is, the runoff percentage in the year is around 10%. If you're talking about something the size of the house, it's closer to 80%. And by the time you get to the scale of the entire metropolitan area, it's only a few percent of the water runs off in a year. That's because the desert is incredibly efficient at not losing water. We, on the other hand, have covered Tucson with 80 square miles of asphalt and 20 square miles of rooftop. And those are great water harvesting surfaces. So what is our future water supply? Well, when you put our rainfall on the scale of a single square mile, it turns out Tucson gets an average about 191 million gallons in the year, though only a small fraction of that actually runs off. Roughly speaking, we've got nearly 200 million gallons of rainfall and approximately 60 million gallons in a year is recoverable. 60 million gallons in a square mile. 2/3 of that roughly is from the streets, the neighborhood streets, and 1/3 is from all the house roofs. So we've got 3 primary sources of water in the urban area. One is conventional water harvesting, you see on the left there, and people can play with some of the things they do on their own home. The second water supply is actually the largest, and that's water that can be used directly to irrigate our landscapes. And then finally, we have what's left can be stored in the ground. One of the technologies is this image in the upper right. That's a particular design for a dry well. And the thing you see below it is a map of the Phoenix metro area showing all the dry wells they've installed. It's something approaching 70,000. Tucson, on the other hand, has a few dozen. So the real question is, where are we going to put all this water? If we say we're going to transform our neighborhood into a safe place that's shaded by rain-watered and gray-watered trees, and slow traffic down and create all the spaces for social gathering and play and food production and stuff. If we were to install in a square mile 300 traffic calming features, that's several for every block in the neighborhood, slowing the traffic down to about 12 miles an hour. That's only turns out to be maybe 1,000 trees. But we have the water out of that 60 million gallons of runoff in a year. We have the water to support approximately 8,000 trees per square mile, which would be a couple of million trees citywide just on the water from residential areas. This doesn't even include water for all the commercially zoned land in the city or major streets. So we could have 300 traffic calming systems, chicanes, traffic circles, diverters, and pocket parks. But we also could add thousands of additional street trees just along the sides, also watered with irrigation, rainwater and gray water near the houses. But we also have the water from the house and the gray water and condensate water enough to support as many as 6,000 or 7,000 fruit trees out of, say, twice the amount of water we use for a mesquite tree. So we have easily the water to support 5,000 fruit and nut trees per square mile without tapping into any of the groundwater we use. All that turns out to only use about half the water we have available to us. So the second line of defense, if you will, is to store it in the ground, because a 1-inch rain over a square mile will produce millions of gallons in an hour. And you have to have a high volume water storage system And the only one I know of is in the ground through a network of dry wells. And even if you have a network of over 10,000 dry wells basically at every residential intersection in the city, you still only take about 2/3 of the water that's hasn't been used by millions of trees. So with all of those things, we still will probably not be able to figure out how to save or use 10 million gallons in a year for every square mile of Tucson. So we have an immense amount of water. And if we use it for the sorts of things that Jan was talking about, we can transform our city into a network of parks, so our neighborhoods can become our parks, and shaded by a rain and gray watered food forest that can provide us with as much of the food we eat as we decide we want to. There's that much water. So in conclusion, what's standing in our way? And the answer, as always, tends to be people. We've created a city which systematically separates us because of the land, the zoning laws, the street design, the structure of the economic system that moves people around all the time. But two specific barriers are important to focus on. One is it's about as far into the weeds as you can get, but the city has a design for a traffic circle that costs about 20 times as much as it needs to. And when you think about doing 300 traffic circles, chicanes and stuff per square mile times 200 square miles of residential area in the city, you're looking at thousands and thousands, in fact, tens of thousands of these traffic calming systems, and charging 20 times as much as they need to is a major barrier. I know that this is actually the case because I built the first permitted traffic circle in Tucson back in the mid-1980s, and it's in better shape than the 5 others in the neighborhood built according to the city's standards, even though it's 20 years older than they are. And it was literally a hole in the asphalt. And the volunteers came out the next day and planted the trees. So one of the barriers is this incredible over cost for what needs to be tens of thousands of traffic calming centers throughout Tucson. And the second thing that is standing in our way is the city has a free permit. They call it either a special events permit, or they rebranded it as a neighborhood fiesta permit or something like that. But it's free, but it takes a month to get approval, and the staff has to spend tens of hours reviewing everything every time a group of neighbors want to get together for any purpose in their neighborhood. So I would actually focus on 2 specific things that the city does now as major barriers to our success in transforming Tucson, so we can plant 1 million trees without using groundwater, and we can transform our city into the sustainable community we want.